Today, I'm going to show you how I drew this pretzel illustration in Procreate. We will go step by step, and I will focus especially on how I create the soft colored pencil texture so the drawing looks handmade instead of flat and digital. If you've ever wondered how to get this kind of look in your own art, keep watching. I will walk you through my whole process. As you're watching these, you can see that the very first thing I do is study my reference photo and break the pretzel down into simple geometric shapes. At the beginning, I like to use mostly straight lines to cut out those basic shapes and get the overall structure in place. Once I'm happy with that base, then I press a little harder with my Apple pencil and start refining the sketch so it actually looks more like a pretzel. The key is, don't think I'm drawing a pretzel at the start, just think about what kind of shapes you see and focus on getting those shapes right first. By the way, if you want to draw along with me, I've prepared a free download for you. The link is in the video description. You will get my final sketch as a PNG file, plus the exact color palette I'm using in this tutorial. So you can just download everything, bring it into Procreate, and then come back here to follow along with the rest of the drawing. Once the line art is done, I move on to the base colors. I lower the opacity of the sketch so it's lighter, but still visible enough to guide where I'm placing the color. A little trick for this stage is to start with a slightly smaller brush and trace around the edges, following the lines first. Then you can switch to a bigger brush and quickly fill in the middle areas. That way you get clean edges without spending too much time on this step. Here I've got the first flat color in, and then I switch to the Liquify tool. Even though I followed the sketch, sometimes you only really feel the overall shape once the color is in. So if something looks a bit awkward at this stage, I just adjust the color shape with Liquify until the silhouette feels nicer and more balanced. Next, on a new layer, I'm adding a slightly darker color on top of that base, just in areas that look more toasted in the reference. I'm basically painting a second layer over those deeper baked parts. And you can see that even with just these two colors, the pretzel already reads clearly as a pretzel. Next, I start giving each color block its own light and shadow, so there's more color variation. Well, this video is just a sped up overview of my membership tutorial. In the full real-time class, I take it much slower and show you exactly where I put the highlights and shadows, how I set up my layers, and which brushes I'm using, all step by step while we draw together. If you enjoy drawing on your iPad but often feel unhappy with what you create, my membership might really help. I believe quantity leads to quality, but only if you're practicing the right things. Inside the membership, we build up gradually from simple plants and flowers to pastries like these, and then to animals and more complex subjects. So you can see yourself improving as you draw more. Now you can see that once I add light and shadow to those two base colors, the pretzel suddenly looks much more three-dimensional. The next step is probably what most of you are most curious about: how to make digital art feel less flat and more like it's really drawn by hand. The secret is choosing a brush with a strong colored pencil texture and then using that brush to slowly deepen and build up the colors. You can see I'm using a slightly darker color and really paying attention to the form of the pretzel. I'm brushing around each little curve and bump so the shading follows the shape. That's what helps the volume really show up. And notice that I'm not jumping straight to the darkest color. I first deepen the color with one darker shade, and then I pick an even darker color and add it in smaller areas on top. By keeping the darkest color in the smallest spots, the pretzel feels more solid and the shading looks much more natural and realistic. Finally, I switch to a less textured brush and use it to add the clearest highlights and the deepest shadows. I put the darkest color mainly along the outer edges of the pretzel so the shape pops out more. I also added where two parts of the pretzel overlap. In those little gaps where the light can't really reach, you get a nice occlusion shadow, and that makes it feel extra three-dimensional. The highlights are easier to understand. I just place them on the areas facing the light source to give everything a gentle glow. And then to bring this little pretzel to life, I like to add a tiny face. Whenever I draw these small characters, I almost always give them blush, soft pink cheeks that instantly make them look cuter. And that's it, we are done with this illustration. Thank you so much for joining along with me and watching this tutorial. I will see you in my next video.